An Islamic terror attack in New York City leaves 8 dead. How should the U.S. react to stop the next attack? Foreign policy and terrorism expert Dr. WALID PHARES will analyze. And later, he's under fire in his own diocese for upholding church teaching amidst a controversy over Catholic burial rites. Bishop Robert Morlino of Madison, Wisconsin, is here with his side of the story. And finally, why is the demand for exorcism on the rise? The official exorcist for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, Father VINCENT LAMPERT, explains. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Dr. WALID PHARES, Bishop Robert Morlino, and Father VINCENT LAMPERT are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. I'll be live tweeting throughout the show, or you can email us at worldover@ewtn.com, though only the nice comments will be read. I'm kidding. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. Jihadi terrorism has once again struck the United States. On Tuesday, 8 were killed and another 12 injured when Uzbek immigrant Sayfullo Saipov sped down a lower Manhattan bike path in a rented truck for nearly a mile. Saipov was shot and disarmed. He exited the vehicle brandishing 2 air guns and yelling, "Allahu Akbar." Federal prosecutors on Wednesday brought terrorism charges against the 29-year-old. He's the father of 3. They claimed that he was consumed by hate and radicalized online. President Donald Trump condemned the attack and said Saipov should get the death penalty. He also renewed his call to reform migrant programs that allow potential terrorists into the United States.
We will never waver in the defense of our beloved country, ever. And we'll never, ever forget the beautiful lives that have been taken from us. That was a horrible event, and we have to stop it, and we have to stop it cold.
More on this in our next segment. And details of the Republican tax reform plan were revealed in the House of Representatives on Thursday. Among the highlights, the proposal reduces the popular mortgage interest reduction for newly purchased homes at up to $500,000. That's down from the current $1 million cap. It also limits the deductibility of local property taxes to $10,000 and eliminates the deduction for state income taxes, in spite of opposition from Republicans in high-tax states. The $4,000 per-child exemption would be repealed. However, the per-child tax credit will increase from $1,000 to $1,600. In spite of the rumors to the contrary, the plan will leave intact 401k retirement accounts. As previously reported, the Republican plan would double the standard deduction used by most average Americans to $12,000 for individuals and $24,000 for families. It shrinks the number of tax brackets from 7 to 3 or 4. And the tax system would be simplified, with most people being able to file their returns on a postcard. The plan also meets President Trump's demand that corporate tax rates be slashed. The president said this week that he would like the plan on his desk for signature by Christmas. And Christian leaders around the world are commemorating the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. On October 31st, 1517, German monk Martin Luther submitted the 95 Theses to his archbishop by nailing a copy to the door of a church. The act sparked the movement that divided Western Christianity. In a joint statement, the Vatican and the Lutheran World Federation marked the end of a year-long ecumenical commemoration. They stressed their mutual bonds despite their past history. The Vatican also issued a commemorative stamp for the anniversary, depicting Martin Luther and a fellow reformer at the foot of the crucified Christ. Elsewhere, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, acknowledged the historical changes triggered by Luther, but also noted the Reformation's dark side, which included, he said, individualism, division, cruelty and war. Metropolitan Hilarion, the chief ecumenical spokesman for the Russian Orthodox Church, said the anniversary is not an occasion to rejoice and triumph because any split in Christianity is an offense against God's will. Nevertheless, he stressed all Christians are united by faith in Christ. And a former chief of the U.S. Bishops' Committee on Doctrine is calling on Pope Francis to end the, quote, chronic confusion he feels the Pope is causing within the Church. A July 31st letter from Capuchin Father Thomas Weinandy to the Pope was made public this week. In it, the priest charges that, in addition to sowing confusion, Francis is demeaning the importance of doctrine and causing the faithful to lose confidence in their supreme shepherd. Father Weinandy told Crux News this week that he alone is responsible for the letter, and he wrote it in a spirit of fraternal concern for Pope Francis and the Universal Church. Weinandy serves on the Vatican's International Theological Commission and until this week was still a consultant to the USCCB's Committee on Doctrine, a post from which he was made to resign following the release of his letter. We'll discuss the letter and dialogue with Bishop Robert Morlino later in the program. And after just a few short weeks, Christians in Iraq's Nineveh plain are again fleeing their homes. The faithful, who had only recently returned home after the defeat of ISIS, are again on the move as Kurdish Peshmerga fighters have clashed with Iraqi government forces there. Approximately 1,000 families have evacuated the Christian town of Teleskov. Chaldean Catholic primate Louis Raphael Sacco denounced the new wave of violence, saying there is a renewed atmosphere of anxiety and fear among Christians in the region. He also noted that some Christian towns are still empty, as homes and infrastructure remain damaged in the wake of the war with the Islamic State. Meanwhile, the recent Trump administration announcement that it plans to provide direct aid to persecuted Christians in the Middle East is being met with praise by some within the Church. This past week, Vice President Mike Pence told those gathered at a conference in D.C. that the U.S. State Department would stop funding ineffective UN aid programs. Instead, the U.S. Agency for International Development would provide support to churches and groups on the ground who are already helping communities persecuted by ISIS. USAID officials have since clarified they'll continue to work with proven UN partners. The Knights of Columbus, which has been one of the leaders in providing aid to the persecuted Christians, support the move. Supreme Knight Carl Anderson told the National Catholic Register that the Knights have been urging direct humanitarian assistance for the persecuted for months. However, the U.S. Bishops' charity organization, Catholic Relief Services, has withheld its support for the Trump pledge, saying they need some more time to figure out what the decision means. The Vatican has declined to comment on the matter. And the University of Notre Dame has dropped its coverage for birth control for its employees and students. Last month, the Trump administration removed the Obama-era mandate that even religiously affiliated employers include birth control coverage in their health insurance plans. Faculty and staff will be cut off on December 31st, students in August of 2018. Notre Dame has long opposed the mandate, but did not take its objections to court, as other institutions did. Instead, the school offered contraceptives through a third party in order to comply with federal regulations. And this just in, the Pope is opening the door for the consideration of married priests. According to a report by an Austrian news agency, the Pope has asked that the issue be added to the agenda for the upcoming Synod on the Amazon. Retired Bishop of Brazil, Erwin Krautler, was reportedly asked by Francis in 2014 to come up with, quote, courageous proposals with regard to the question of married priests. This Bishop Krautler told reporters that the Pope once again requested valid proposals on the matter. Currently, married Catholic priests are only allowed in some cases among former Anglican ministers and the Catholic Eastern Rite churches. We'll keep our eye on that story. When we return, terror returned to Lower Manhattan this week. How to prevent the next one? Dr. WALID PHARES returns with analysis. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
This was an act of terror, and a particularly cowardly act of terror aimed at innocent civilians. We know that this action was intended to break our spirit. But we also know New Yorkers are strong, New Yorkers are resilient, and our spirit will never be moved by an act of violence, an act meant to intimidate us.
Welcome back to The World Over. That was Mayor de Blasio in New York. 8 people were killed, 13 injured in New York City, of course, on Tuesday when a truck plowed into a crowd of bicyclists and pedestrians in Lower Manhattan. A 29-year-old man of Uzbek descent carried out the attack in the name of ISIS. What does this incident tell us about the changing nature of the Islamic State's assault on the U.S.? Here with analysis, I'm joined by foreign policy and terrorism expert for Fox News, as well as former foreign policy advisor to the president, Dr. WALID PHARES. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you very much for having me.
First of all, your reaction to what you heard there. The mayor sounded a lot like Governor Cuomo and many other officials. This is an attack on our spirit. We're going to be strong. We're going to stand tough. Does this miss the point in your mind? And what are you hearing from leaders in other places?
Something is going wrong since a few years. I mean, after 9/11, the speech of the president in Congress was somewhat advanced to explain to the American public who the attackers are and why they are perpetrating this. And we used to make fun of the French and the Arabs because they did not have that narrative. What is happening now is that what we've heard from New York, from the leaders of New York, is much less advanced than the president of France, Macron, who called it Islamic fundamentalist or Salafist, or the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Tunisians. There is something that has changed in America, and that needs to change for us to be able to win the war of ideas.
The president wants to roll back this diversity visa program. This terrorist, Saipov, he came into the country via this diversity lottery. It's kind of like a Powerball for jihadis. He got into the country with this. The president, in a side comment yesterday during a cabinet meeting, said 23 other people may have come in with him. Either he sponsored them or through some other means. Your thoughts on this diversity visa program? Does that need to be rolled back?
First, Raymond, we have seen over the years that whatever that gate was that they have used, this is a legal gate and there are illegal gates, and we have even immigration or come here as anything. What the jihadists or potential jihadists do is that they use the same gate to get more people in. So we have to focus on the vetting. Now, with regard to this program, I think the president is raising the issue and then is asking Congress, do you still want this program? Is it really necessary? And I think the debate should cover not just that one, but the access to the United States. And one thing across the board, across all programs, is vetting. That's what we need.
Okay, but you say vetting. What does that mean? The president's talked about extreme vetting. How do you extreme vet a person from Syria or Uzbekistan, where you have these countries that are in collapse, in their own ruin? There's no documentation on these people.
That is a great question, vetting, since the president and other congressional leaders were talking about it. What it means, basically, in this case, is that we want to make sure that the person coming, the individual crossing into the United States, is not a jihadist. That's what vetting. And we're not talking about his private life or her private vision of the world. Now, extreme vetting is to make sure that we have a lower level of examination of connections. Are they connected to radicals or others? Have they traveled to problematic areas? But that's the lower level. What we need to have is an agency that examines the ideas. Are these people connected to or impacted by jihadi ideologies? That does not exist simply because over the past 8 years and a half, the previous administration, the Obama administration, completely edited out, deleted everything that has to do with the ideology. So whatever the president, the administration, and even Congress, if they decide to do now, we are behind. We are 8 years behind.
The travel ban, the so-called travel bans the president tried to enact by executive order, they've both been stopped by the courts. Should Uzbekistan have been on that list? It isn't.
It's discussed by many experts. Look, you have the span of how many countries that have jihadists, then it will be much, much larger. We're talking about dozens of countries where the jihadists operate. But what is important about the ban is to make sure that meanwhile we are working on the vetting system. This is not a ban forever. This was an idea that we're going to stop the flow and then see how we can detect the jihadists within that flow. So I hope now in the second phase, when the administration and hopefully Congress will come up with a solution, that this solution is not going to be blocked as well.
Saipov, this 29-year-old attacker here, he rents a truck from Home Depot, he drives it through a crowd, he brandishes guns. He then pulls out, yells Allahu Akbar.
Yeah.
When he's imprisoned, he asks for an ISIS flag to be brought to his hospital bed. Why are New York and federal authorities, in the initial hours after the attack, what was the mystery? They were saying, well, we're looking for a motive. This isn't the Vegas shooting.
That's right.
The motive is apparent, isn't it?
It is apparent. I mean, this has to do with how we give guidelines to our government and bureaucracies and agencies. I mean, they were looking for actual criminal motive. They're clear. I mean, there were people who were killed. But probably what they needed was to get more information about his connections. But the public knows what the motives are. I mean, when you shout these slogans in a situation of violence, I mean, you can say Allahu Akbar for many things.
Yeah,
but if you say it, when you're saying it and then you're killing people, that's the hallmark of the jihadists. So we need to educate further ourselves and our government and our bureaucracies, but most importantly, educate the public, because the public needs sign. If next time there is a car hurtling towards them and a guy shouting this with menacing attitude, they need to know this is an act of jihadi terrorism.
Right. Saipov, this terrorist, he was radicalized on the internet. It was images, it was articles on the internet. He's 29 years old. How do you stop this kind of radicalization in the United States? Obviously, certain individuals are going to be more prone to radicalization, and I would argue there's a religious dimension there that we always ignore, cover our eyes, see no evil. But how do you, in advance, stop these people from being radicalized?
Look, I spoke to many leaders in the Middle East, some in Europe. They have done some experimentation of methods. What is very important is the validation. Validation meaning when this individual, before being indoctrinated or radicalized, looks around, he or she want to see that that action is negative. You should not go into that direction. What it means, president of the country, congressional leaders, heads of agencies, all of them should validate that this is the ideology that is the enemy's ideology. Once we go into that direction, that individual's world will shrink. Second, we need to have allies, Muslim moderate allies, and we have some. The problem is the political culture in the United States has not recognized the existence of this ideology so far.
Well, when the president went over in his first foreign trip, when he went to Saudi Arabia, I saw that as an amazing move. Went to Saudi Arabia, went to Jerusalem, went to Rome, to call on these religious leaders primarily, and the governing, particularly the Muslim world, and said, you need to clean up your own house. And then he went to the other religious leaders and said, I need your moral and spiritual support. Is that still missing? Has the world gotten the message?
First of all, that was really a benchmark. We discussed it here a few months ago. What should have happened after that is a follow-up, is for these leaders basically that he met and uploaded him, etc., to go into that direction. Second, we should have had more work here. The president should have been backed by Congress, at least in this field. We're not talking about all the other political problems that we know about, but there should have been a consensus on a national security doctrine, which is still not, available, about where is the threat, what we should do about it. And the opposition to that issue is still fierce. The opposition is a little bit partially responsible for the fact that the administration was not able to move forward in that regard.
What's different in this attack as you look at it? You have watched, and we have watched, multiple attacks all over the world, in Barcelona, in London, in Paris, one after another. These things seem to happen like clockwork, almost weekly. And there is an ideology that, in more cases than not, is propelling and driving the adherents of this radical strain of Islam to enact violence and to kill. What is different with this particular assailant?
This one, the difference is that they are discovering our weak points. The ideological background is all the same. It did not change. The determination by ISIS to send a message, we don't know if he's connected or not, doesn't matter at this point in time. He's connected ideologically.
Right.
But what's happening is that our cities, our urban centers, our life is open. So if we don't act quickly, this is going to be more and more of it. I mean, this is not going to be the last terror act, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you expect more of these random localized events with trucks and knives, and you don't even need explosives. Look. I mean, though we did have, people forget that Chelsea bombing. Remember, they found the pressure cooker in the outside that thing, or the Pulse nightclub. These things keep happening, and we almost have cultural amnesia about it.
Yeah, that's the problem. After every act, my thoughts are, when is the next act? And it's what you do between the two acts that counts, not at the moment of the act. I mean, at the moment of the act, you have to take care of the terrorists, take care of your people.
Right.
But the real hard work is between, when it's over into the next activity. We need to be proactive.
I have always been intrigued for years about, and I guess it came from covering Muslim-Catholic dialogue many years ago, about the interaction of ideas, and it seems to me Islam is filling a void for these young men, many of them from broken families or have difficult relationships, or they're in a certain cycle that they find themselves, but they find validation, they find manhood, and they find God in this warped ideology, and they embrace it. Where is the religious response from Christians and moderate Islam to reach out to these people and to create something to fill the vacuum?
Absolutely. The term that you use is exactly the center of the problem, validation, in Arabic, even tashriya. I met with the head of Al-Azhar, remember in 2015 we spoke about it. The following year I went to Egypt to meet with the Minister of Religious Affairs, just to get from them the sense of, can you help yourselves first? Because they are under attack by the jihadists, and us in the world, in terms of pushing back against this radicalization. They said they can, but we need to have unity. You need to have the United States first, and the Europeans, and us working together. So you guys, your Congress, your administration, your media should be together to isolate this ideology. That's the message I got from Egypt, and I got from many other Arab Muslim countries.
Well, the president of Egypt doesn't get a lot of credit, but he looked ahead of Alaska in the face and said, you've got to clean up your act. We've got to get something done here.
We are in the beginning of something, but we need really to exert leadership here in Washington and really have a unity, at least on that point.
And it's not enough coming from just the White House in a one-off event.
No. This needs really a national unity. This needs Congress, the White House, the agencies, all in one path. And then they could fight politically on a million other ends, but that needs to be united.
I want to read to you, this is a statement from Cardinal Dolan, the Archbishop of New York. In the wake of these attacks, he said, "Today our city and our nation are stunned and horrified by another act of senseless violence." Is it an act of senseless violence to the perpetrator, to the attacker?
Look, Raymond, in the eyes of the jihadists, this is actually an act of war that is legitimate under the ideology of jihadism. So that does not apply. Statements like these, while they are very good on a theoretical level, spiritual level, could apply anywhere around the globe against any enemy. What you need to do, if you have that position, that podium, is to explain to the public what is the right thing to do, who are your allies, and who's the enemy. You have to have the courage of Jean Paul II, who actually spoke about the Soviet Union, spoke about what's happening in Poland. And when people were either killed or massacred, he would expose them because he said at the time, I remember, truth is your path. And I heard him not from Washington. I was already still in Beirut, so I heard him, and that gave me a lot of courage.
Yeah, I want to read one more thing. This is the end of Cardinal Dolan's statement. He said, "We have to work towards greater respect and understanding among all people, so the heinous and evil acts like this become a thing of the past." When Islamists hear a statement like that, their reaction is what?
See, the heinous part of it is not among regular Christians and Muslims and Jews and Taoists and Buddhists. So it's really all of these against the jihadists. What the bishop or the cardinal, His Eminence, needs to tell our people and tell our friends in other religions is that we are all together against who? He needs to expose evil. That's the essence of a moral message.
Very good. WALID PHARES, thank you for being here, for your insight. We will certainly have you back, but I hope not too soon, because that will mean we're in the middle of another one of these terror attacks. So I hope we see each other under happier circumstances. Thank you for being here, WALID. For more on WALID PHARES and his media appearances, you can read his columns at walidphares.com. And you can follow him on Twitter at WALID PHARES. When we return, my next guest is going through the blades for upholding church teaching on Catholic burial. Some say he's out of step with Pope Francis. Bishop Robert Morlino of Madison, Wisconsin, will help us sort it all out when the World Over continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. My next guest is no stranger to controversy, but it's a little strange for a bishop to be attacked for upholding age-old teachings of the church within his own diocese. Recently, he gave his priests direction on how to handle Catholic funerals for gays who are engaged in public unions. These guidelines became public and all hell broke loose, including an online petition requesting that Pope Francis remove him from office. Here to explain what's really going on, I'm joined via satellite by Bishop Robert Morlino of Madison, Wisconsin. Your Excellency, thank you for taking the time and being here.
It's great to be with you and your great audience, Raymond.
Well, they are a great audience. I don't know about me, but we'll leave that alone for another day. Recently, your Vicar General issued a memo to priests in your diocese regarding the pastoral care of LGBT Catholics when it comes to church burial. The memo, which was leaked, is called Consideration of Funeral Rites for Persons in Homosexual, Civil, or Notorious Union. Give me a sense of where this came from, why that memo was issued in the first place, and what led to it.
Yeah, the context is very important. We have regular questions coming to us from individual pastors or from the priest council about these matters. And we have a regular way of communicating with priests, the Saturday mailing to priests from the Vicar General, which addresses simply the answer to their questions in shorthand. In other words, I did not, out of a clear blue sky, decide to speak out about this. As a matter of fact, everything that was said there by Monsignor Bartella is the straightforward teaching of the Church, of which I improve and which I very much want to promote. The problem is that when people are tuned in 3/4 of the way through a conversation, which has been going on, and they get shorthand bottom lines,
right,
then we got a problem.
Yeah, and the headlines
because the misinterpretation is created that we don't care about homosexual people, that we want to have nothing to do with them. And the way the conversation began here in Madison was when I used the analogy that we should consider those who, with same-sex attraction, who want to be true followers of Christ, as being given a particularly heavy cross to carry, and that we should help them under the cross like Simon of Cyrene helped Jesus, and that we should certainly not kick them when they're under the cross.
Yeah.
That's how the conversation began. You'd never guess that from what you're hearing now.
No, and the headlines were...
And as a matter...
Let me just interrupt you for a second, Bishop. The headlines were Bishop Robert Morlino forbidding burials, Catholic burials, to homosexuals. What is the teaching? Because as I read it, it's rather nuanced. You're giving priests, it actually gets down to funeral rites may be denied, this is a quote, for manifest sinners in which public scandal of the faithful can't be avoided. Explain that. And are you denying Catholic burials to gay people?
Let me put it this way. I'm simply following the Code of Canon Law. And canon law says that a funeral may not be denied a Catholic who ordinarily has a right to it, unless all three things are happening at once. First of all, the person is involved in a manifest public sin. That is, it's not limited to members of the family. It's not just a few friends who know about the sinful situation. It's public. And certainly if someone were to go through a same-sex partnership ceremony, if someone were to do that, well, then that would constitute a manifest public act with long-term consequences, minimally. But in order for someone to be denied, there has to be that manifest public action, which is against Christ and the Church. Secondly, the person who has done this must have had shown no signs of repentance. The slightest sign of repentance means that they get a Catholic funeral. Now, if I can go back a few years, when Senator Teddy Kennedy died and was given a very Catholic funeral, I wrote in a column, because some of my people were here protesting that he got such a funeral. I said that simply we err as Catholics on the side of mercy. We always err on the side of mercy and showing mercy. I didn't want to get into the technicalities of canon law at that moment. But in fact, Senator Kennedy was a manifest sinner in terms of his voting record, pro-abortion, pro so many other things. He was a manifest sinner. His funeral could not be held without avoiding scandal, without scandal. His funeral caused people in this diocese of mine to be scandalized, to think, well, everything must be all right.
So your focus is on scandal, then? You don't want to cause scandal through this sacrament of burial.
Focus is really on three things: manifest public sin, lack of repentance, and scandal. Now, given the churchmen who presided at that funeral, I have to believe that they knew that there were signs of repentance. And so therefore, even though public scandal couldn't be avoided, even though the sin was public and manifest, nonetheless, there was no lack of sign of repentance, and therefore, he should have received a Catholic funeral. Only if those three matters coincide in a negative way is the funeral to be denied. And in that case, canon law says funeral rites must be denied, not made. That is, if there's a manifest public sin, if someone is not repentant, and that there is an unavoidable public scandal. If all of those three conditions perdure, then a person must not be given a Catholic funeral.
Well, Bill Donahue pointed out recently, in 2014, Pope Francis excommunicated a number of mafiosos because they were manifest sinners. So this continues today, the church saying, look, you're living a lifestyle and you're living in a way incompatible with church teaching. Therefore, we're denying you the sacraments so that you will repent. That is the end goal, I imagine, here, right?
Yes, and the problem is that now so many people have been given the impression that, in fact, I hate them and that we don't want to care for them. People with same-sex attraction or same-sex partnerships. And I feel terrible about that.
Give me a sense of this instruction, because it does say that priests should be, and I'll get the language here, that priests should consider, among other things, whether the deceased or the living partner was a promoter of the gay lifestyle, and whether the deceased repented before death, whether the deceased's partners have any role or public role in the funeral, that they shouldn't have a public role if they were advertising and promoting this lifestyle. Some look at that and say, Bishop Morlino, this is exclusionary and you're keeping people from a Catholic burial. You would say what?
Well, what I'm trying to do is fulfill my responsibility to avoid scandal, that is, of actually leading Catholics into sin by letting them think this is okay, or getting them all confused. And things like that can get people all confused. In other words, if somebody says that so-and-so is survived by a gay partner, in effect, and the funeral is taking place at Holy Redeemer Parish in Madison, that says that all of a sudden the church is turning the other way in the face of gay marriage. And we cannot give that impression. That impression confuses people and possibly leads them into sin.
Okay. Bishop Morlino.
And so we want to look with love on our whole Catholic community, including those with same-sex attraction or gay partners. We want to look on everybody with love, so we can't forget the needs of those who have a right not to be confused.
Mm-hmm. Bishop Morlino, I want to pick up on something else and change topics just slightly here. There's big news breaking. A former doctrinal head of a major committee at the U.S. Bishops' Conference, a Capuchin father, Thomas Weinandy, wrote this open letter to the Pope. He felt convicted to do so. In it, he charges, he writes it as almost a fraternal letter to the Pope, and he suggests that the Pope has created chronic confusion and a seemingly intentional lack of clarity via his teaching. Now, as a result of this, Father Weinandy was forced to resign from the USCCB. They came out with a document, which I'll read in a moment. But your general impression of this letter, which no doubt you've seen.
Well, first of all, Father Weinandy is an extremely reputable scholar, and in fact, a friend of mine. A very good theologian and a friend of mine, truth be told. I cannot make judgments about Father Weinandy and his relationship to the USCCB because I'm far away from all of that. I mean, I'm sure there's a conversation and a story that led up to this action by Father Weinandy and by the USCCB. But in this case, I'm really not in a position to judge that. But Father Weinandy is certainly a reputable scholar. I'm convinced that he was acting in conscience. And perhaps it is the case when one acts in conscience in this way, that is prohibitive to his serving as a consultant to a bishop's doctrinal committee, which is what he was. He was a consultant at this point. So I think, Cardinal DiNardo and those at the conference and Father Weinandy, they must have engaged together in a narrative that led to this conclusion. And since I don't have access to that narrative, I don't want to possibly make any rash judgments.
In it, he really runs through a number of confusing things that he says are confusing the laity, including Amoris Laetitia, which we've been talking about since its release. And he quotes, this is Father Weinandy writing to the Pope, he says, "Your guidance at times seems intentionally ambiguous, thus inviting both a traditional interpretation of Catholic teaching on marriage and divorce, as well as one that might imply a change in that teaching." And he goes on. Some of this is very pointed. He questions bishops' appointments. He says this has led to a diminishment in people's confidence in the Supreme Pastor, in the Pope himself. And then he says that people are afraid to even vent criticism because they may be marginalized or worse. I guess the question, and I don't want to put you in a difficult position either, but in the release by the USCCB, Cardinal DiNardo says that this furnishes us with an opportunity to reflect on the nature of dialogue within the Church. Are you concerned that perhaps dialogue is breaking down in the Church if anyone sounds a discordant theme by referring to something that went before or by established papal teaching or church teaching? Why has that become controversial? And is that dialogue not worth having at this moment?
Well, more dialogue is certainly needed up front about a lot of these issues. The way in which it is had becomes the difficulty. The problem, of course, in all of this, honestly, from my point of view, are the mass media. Because whatever anyone tries to say in the context of an honest dialogue and spelling out an honest narrative is twisted by the media so as to cause conflict. Conflict sells. Advertisers buy. That's the game. And we are in a terrible pitch battle to get the truth out, which is almost impossible.
You know the charge they're leveling at you. Dignity USA is saying you are not welcoming in the spirit of Pope Francis. And they're even asking the Pope to get rid of you. What was your reaction when you heard that?
Well, that with the people like that, I've been there and done that already. Several years ago, there was a similar effort, and I wake up every morning convinced that God's will be done for the world and my life that day. And knowing that, I just proceed with serenity and a good smile. And I say, well, they do what they have to do. But I do think that a lot of this stuff that happens through the media is works of darkness. And I really do think that the source is in Satan. He has a superhuman intellect and a superhuman will. And Satan is not a wimp. And so we have to be not wimps in trying to live the virtuous and moral life in terms of imitating Jesus Christ and in finding in him our hope for everything. And then we just go forward. We just go forward. I've said to many people, well, it's all in a day's work.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there. Bishop Robert Morlino, thank you so much for being with us. You can read Bishop Morlino's weekly columns by visiting madisondiocese.org. When we return, cases of demonic possession and requests for the Catholic Church's rite of exorcism are on the rise. But why? Up next, real-life exorcist Father Vincent Lampert explains. The World Over continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. He is one of 50 priests in the U.S. trained for a very important ministry, and the demand for his services is growing. My next guest is a Vatican-trained exorcist for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. He's traveled all over the country speaking about his experiences doing battle with evil. I sat down with him here in Washington, D.C. to discuss his ministry and why he believes demonic activity and involvement in the occult are on the rise. Here's my interview with Father Vincent Lampert. Father, we seem to be seeing an explosion in demand for, pardon the crude term, your services as an exorcist. Why do you think we're seeing this increase in both attention as well as perhaps authentic possession now rather than years before?
People oftentimes ask me, is there a greater sense of evil in the world today? My response always is, I don't know that the devil has upped his game, but I think more people today are willing to play the devil's game. You know, faith in God will lead us in one direction, the lack of faith will lead us in another, and certainly faith is on decline in the lives of many people.
What are some of the portals or doorways? I mean, demonic possession, more often than not, doesn't just come upon ambushes as we're walking home in the evening. There are ways that the devil enters in, yes?
Yes, there are. And
what would those be?
as an exorcist, that would be the main thing I would look for. What's the entry point? Such as ties to the occult. Maybe somebody has been cursed. Somebody's been dedicated to a demon. One hasn't invited a demon in. Broken relationships, a life of habitual sin. These are primarily the ways I think that people can invite evil in.
Were you at all frightened by being party to this? I mean, you're seeing this phenomena. Oftentimes, the guttural voices, there are things at times that can levitate their cold spots. I mean, I've spoken to many of your confreres who speak of this sort of phenomena. Did you experience any of that, and did it cause you to hesitate at all?
Yeah, hesitation would be a better word than fear, because I mean, I saw a lot of the traditional things that people describe: eyes rolling back into one's head, foaming at the mouth, growling, snarling. Even saw someone levitate during an exorcism. But I came to learn early on that these are all tricks of the devil trying to disrupt the prayer of the church.
And how do you evaluate people? They come to the door, they call you, and they say, "Father, I'm possessed," or "My daughter's possessed," or "We think there's a possession here." What happens? What would you do as a first order?
By the time somebody contacts me, there's a protocol that's followed, at least here in the United States, having somebody get a psychiatric evaluation, having one get a physical examination, and then I would do a complete history of the person, trying to figure out if evil truly is present, what was the entry point, and then trying to resume the person's spiritual life, because it isn't just about praying for someone and casting out evil. It's about helping the person to really establish an authentic relationship with Christ.
Tell me about the levels of possession. There are gradations of demonic influence. It's not all full-on possession where people are, climbing up the sides of the walls. You encounter, you've come across things that are of a lesser variety, but no less distressing and concerning to those involved.
Yeah, there's different types of extraordinary demonic activity. Demonic infestation, the presence of evil in a location or associated with an object. Demonic vexation would be physical attacks that one is experiencing, and then demonic obsession, which would be mental attacks, and then the other one, as you mentioned, demonic possession itself.
Now, in infestation, what does that mean? Describe that. Have you come across that in your work?
I get lots of calls about people who think strange things are happening in their house, or maybe an object that's been cursed. So it would really, if something's been cursed, it's been dedicated to a demon. If something is blessed, it's commended to God. So the role of the exorcist in that case would be to go in and to offer a prayer of blessing and breaking that connection with evil.
So sometimes it's as simple as doing a blessing, a deliverance prayer. What's the difference? Tell people about that, because I think some, even priests, they hear exorcism and they all kind of start pushing away from the table and looking for the exits. Let's face it, it frightens some people. It's seen as something kind of otherworldly that I don't want to get too close to. I told you the story earlier. My daughter, when I said, who are you interviewing tomorrow, Dad? I said, well, I have an author, and I'm going to interview a Father Vincent, who's an exorcist. And she looked at me and said, well, I would recommend you don't shake his hand. I said, oh, great. So, from the mouths of babes, but I think she was wrong. Give me a sense of when you hear that a house is possessed, or or a house is infested. How do you determine that it's infested or not?
Well, you determine if something has actually taken place in that house of an evil nature. St. Thomas Aquinas would say that evil is neither here nor there. We say it's there if it's choosing to act there. So if evil is present in a house, was somebody ties to the occult, was some heinous crime committed there? So trying to determine what brought about that presence of evil.
When you are called in on a case, do you have a team around you? I know some exorcists I've interviewed in the past, they have a medical team, a couple of doctors they consult with. They also have a group of what I would consider sort of prayer backup, prayer warriors who attend the exorcism. How do you proceed?
I kind of look at it differently. In speaking with my bishop over the years, I've always thought the presbyterate of the diocese really is the prayer team. It really is engaging all the priests of the diocese to think about their own vocation, their own calling to priesthood and what that means. And certainly a common theme about being a priest is dealing with the forces of evil and helping people to establish a right relationship with God.
Should you try to recruit fellow priests to come to the exorcism when you're performing the rite, when you're...
Yes, I have absolutely done that, and asked them to be there to pray.
And tell me about that rite. Tell me about that exorcism rite. Some people may be unfamiliar with it. Do you perform it in Latin? And why is it so special and reserved for a designated exorcist?
The Ritual of Exorcism that came out in 1999 was the last liturgical rite to be updated after the Second Vatican Council. It was tweaked again in 2004, and it basically replaced the one that had been in existence since 1614. But one of the big differences in the new rite, it included supplicating prayers, which are prayers directed to God, which anyone can pray. So the rite really is a liturgical prayer of the church, really asking God to intervene in the life of one who is being afflicted by evil and asking God to give that person the sense of peace once again.
Now, a lot of people who've only seen exorcisms, and which would probably be the majority of us, on television or on a film or on the stage, these can happen anywhere, and usually in the room of the afflicted or in a house or something. That's usually not where these exorcisms take place. Where do you usually conduct an exorcism?
Well, the devil doesn't get to decide where he will be defeated. So an exorcism always takes place in a sacred space. I always tell people that an exorcism is never going to take place in an abandoned house on a dead-end street at midnight during an electrical storm. The devil doesn't get to decide.
Don't tell Bill Blatty now. He'll get very upset. I'm sorry, Bill. Go ahead.
But the devil doesn't get to decide where he will be defeated.
And part of the rite is to get the demon to reveal his identity, to speak the name that is infesting and possessing this person. Why is that a focal point? What does that achieve?
Because knowing the name, when somebody gives your name, you have a certain power or control over them. So when a demon names itself, it's demonstrating that it's finally submitting to the power and the authority of Christ.
Huh. And it takes it can take repeated exorcisms for this to happen.
Because it depends on the strength of the evil that's present. Huh. My experience is that demons of a weaker nature, when prayers are prayed, they leave immediately. If ones are of a more dominant nature, they're more persistent. I will say, too, there's a difference between exorcisms performed in the pagan world and in the apostate world. So parts of the world where the good news of Christ has never been proclaimed and one's afflicted, the exorcisms are immediate and effective. But in the apostate world, where people have heard the good news, but now they've turned a deaf ear to it, it does seem that evil makes a greater claim on these people.
And is it one entity possessing them, or can it be multiple entities?
It's usually not a question of one, but of multiple. And not that there's a sense of fraternity or collaboration amongst the demons, but it does seem that they act in clusters.
Now, I came across an interview with you, and you said not only is it a demon possessing a person, but souls of the dead can affix or attach to someone. Explain that.
That's really something that's being debated now. Do the souls of the damned kind of wander the earth awaiting the final judgment? So I don't know that there's a definitive answer to that, but it's certainly a question that has been brought up within the International Association of Exorcists, just as a way to debate those types of things.
Tell me for a moment about, we've been seeing a lot of cult-like activity. I talked to friends of mine in law enforcement, and they've been finding dead animals all over the place, beheaded animals. Do you see this as a rise in the occult, in whether it's animal sacrifice or some kind of santeria or this Santa Muerte, this movement in Mexico? What are we seeing here in the United States?
I think what we're seeing is that because faith is in decline in the lives of so many people, even millennials, I think I read recently that 70% of millennials no longer profess any religious affiliation whatsoever. So as belief in God is deteriorating, there seems to be a growing fascination with these occult practices.
And you think it's filling that void?
It is, because I think the human person has that innate desire for something more. Of course, I would agree with Augustine that, our hearts are restless, O Lord, until they rest in you. But when people have rejected God, they're trying to fill that in with something else.
Tell me for a moment, Father Gabriel Amorth, at the time Rome's chief exorcist, now deceased, he said ISIS is Satan. He was talking about the Islamic State and the way they're manifesting throughout the Middle East, and that this is a manifestation of satanic activity. Would you agree with that?
Well, one would have to say, what is Satan all about? He's about division and hatred and violence. So to that degree, the answer would be yes, because as Christians, we believe that Christ came to create community. He gave us the church. But you look at groups like that, and they're all about violence again, and hatred, and tearing things apart.
And death, and chaos. And chaos, which is another mark of the devil. What is the most misunderstood facet of what you do, and the thing you think people should understand about this ministry, which is what it is?
Exorcism basically is a prayer of the church. It's praying with somebody who is afflicted. I think oftentimes people want to get caught up in all the theatrics of exorcism. You know, I tell people that if you think that you're up against the forces of evil, all you need to do is pray. As a Catholic, go to Mass, receive the sacraments, and the devil's already on the run. But people kind of look at that and they're like, huh? They really are looking for me to tell them to do something extraordinary. But it's very much the ordinary components of our Christian faith that keep the devil at bay.
And often the lack of them that present an opening.
Exactly.
Now, do you, final question, when you see children afflicted, and I don't know how many you may have come across in your work or not, I don't know how high an incidence or low it might be. We don't have any data on that sort of thing. How do you explain that to people when you have a child who, you know, it's not like they were looking to get into trouble or consciously involved in evil practices? I imagine some could be cursed by someone else?
Exactly, because any child under the age of reason cannot invite evil on themselves, either directly or indirectly,
Right.
because God would protect and safeguard them. So for a child to really be afflicted with evil, someone else would have to be the cause of that. Perhaps they've been cursed, dedicated to a demon. You know, one of the exorcisms in Rome that I was able to participate in, the young lady told me that her mother had dedicated her to Satan at her birth. And by the time she was 12, she was able to escape from that environment. She ended up on the streets of Rome and then eventually made her way to the priest who was mentoring me.
Wow.
And then he was able to get her out of that and break the forces of evil in her life. The great news is that she went on to become a religious sister. And she dedicated her life to working with street children in the city of Rome. She knew what it was like to be on the streets, and so she was striving to make a positive difference in the lives of others. And what's important about that story is that it reminds us that no matter, you know, how one may be involved in evil, no one's ever completely lost to God. God can reach anybody.
Father Lampert, sounds like a good place to end this. Thank you for being here and for your work. That is all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. You can like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. Be sure to join us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.